Okay, I think I'm going to start as people are joining on so that we can maximize the time for our speakers. Good morning. Bonjour, sénatrices et sénateurs, députés, members of parliament, staff, and of course our very special guests. My name is Mary Coyle. I represent the province of Nova Scotia in the Senate of Canada. Welcome and thank you for joining us this morning for our second Senators for Climate Solutions Senate session of 2024, entitled Keeping the Lights On, Ensuring Energy Security and Stability in the Transition to Net Zero and Beyond. We're very pleased to be co-hosting this event with the All-Party Climate Caucus, and I'm happy that our colleague Senatrice Pierrette Ringette has agreed to co-chair today's panel discussion. I apologize in advance that our interpretation was canceled at the last minute. This is not acceptable. Sadly, we did not have any time to really adjust and find a private provider. Senate interpretation just let us know yesterday, so I apologize for that. Senatrice Ringette, however, would be able to handle the questions in French and English for people if required. So I'll just leave that there, that apology. I'd like to acknowledge that we're having this session on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. We're fortunate to have four well-regarded experts with us today as we look at how we literally keep the lights on, how we make sure our energy supply is secure, stable, and reliable now and into the future. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Fatih Birol, the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency. The IEA works with governments and industry to shape a secure and sustainable energy future for all. Welcome back, Dr. Birol. We also have Mr. Matthew Johnson, Vice President, Strategy and Development, Hydro-Québec. Hydro-Québec is the fourth largest hydropower producer in the world. Mr. Johnson spearheaded the development of Hydro-Québec's strategic plan, 2022 to 2026, and Action Plan 2035 towards a decarbonized and prosperous Quebec. Mr. Johnson, thank you for filling in at the last minute for Michael Sabia, who had to travel overseas and who has promised to be with us in the fall. We also have Ms. Kate Harland, the research lead mitigation for the Canadian Climate Institute. She's worked in climate policy for the UK and EU governments and has worked for the Chief Science Advisor to the Prime Minister of New Zealand. She's also worked with Nissan on low-carbon vehicle strategies. And finally, we also have from Canada's western provinces, from Alberta, Dr. Andrew Leach is an energy and environmental economist who holds a joint appointment with the University of Alberta's faculties of law and arts. He has advised various levels of government with his areas of expertise being oil sands regulation, clean energy innovations, and climate change policy. Each panelist will make a brief presentation. After all panelists have spoken, Senatrice Ringette will moderate the question and answer period. Now, in order to speak during the meeting, you'll require a Senate-grade headset as we are recording today's session. I'd like to thank our guests again for joining us today. And now, very quickly, I'd like to turn over to our first panelist, Dr. Fatih Birol from the International Energy Agency, to start us off with the global picture and where Canada fits into that picture. Dr. Birol, welcome back.
Thank you very much, Madam Senator, and greetings to all the senators and the colleagues from the IEA headquarters in Paris. It's a great honor and a pleasure to be back to this group and share with you some of our thoughts about the global energy and climate trends. Dear colleagues, we are seeing at least two major challenges when we look at the global picture. One is the energy security. We understand from time to time, we are reminded from time to time how critical it is. In Europe, after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it was a reminder of many governments how critical it is. At the same time, we are seeing around the world the increasing number of extreme weather events, much frequent and much more intense. And energy is at the heart of the climate debate because more than 80% of the emissions causing climate change comes from the energy sector, which means without fixing the problem in the energy sector, we have zero chance whatsoever to reach our climate goals. Now, I wanted to say a bit where we are in terms of energy sector, especially as far as the clean energy transitions are concerned. I am sure you all follow the important and successful COP28 meeting in Dubai, and energy was at the heart of the discussions. And as International Energy Agency, we made some demands to the governments and the COP28 presidency, and we said, if these outcomes come from Dubai, we would consider it as a successful one. And we are very happy that most of the demands we have put on the table have been agreed and signed more than 200 countries around the world as pledges. Those include tripling of the renewable capacity between now and 2030, doubling energy efficiency, making a major decline in methane emissions, and moving away from fossil fuels in an orderly way. So I think this document, which has been again signed and endorsed more than 200 countries around the world, sets the travel for the energy world for the next years to come, and the direction of travel is now clear. And when we look at the numbers, which we do at the IEA, we are a number-driven organization, I see that the clean energy transitions are moving fast and faster than many of us realize. If I may, Madam Chair, I want to share with you a couple of numbers. First, perhaps the most important sector in the energy use, electricity generation. In the year 2023, last year, of all power plants built in the world, 85% of them were renewables. About 5% nuclear power additions and 10% fossil fuels. When we say renewables, it was solar, wind, hydropower, geothermal. They were the main renewable contributors. And for nuclear, mainly coming from additions from China, it also helped to low carbon electricity generation. This is the renewables, this is the electricity generation part. Let's look at another sector, transportation sector. We are seeing around the world a major electrification of the transportation sector, especially for the cars. 4 years ago, only 4 years ago, 1 out of 25 cars sold in the world was electric. 1 out of 25 4 years ago. And this year, it is expected that more than 1 out of 5 cars sold will be an electric car. In many major markets, such as China, US, Europe, electric cars are becoming a major choice for the consumers. And in China, almost every second car sold today is an electric car. Another one, the home heating. Heat pumps sales are double digit, especially in North America, in Europe, in Japan, and in China. It is also growing very strongly. And another important clean energy technology, nuclear power. As IEA has predicted, nuclear is making a comeback, a strong comeback. In terms of countries who have the nuclear industry and wanted to phase out, they changed their opinion and they decided to keep nuclear plants. and give lifetime extensions. Some countries are building new nuclear power plants, and some others are looking in the advanced nuclear technologies such as small modular reactors. Maybe one final number I want to share with you. It is the number of investments. Our numbers show that this year, the entire energy investments, oil, gas, renewables, nuclear, etc., when we look at all of them, the entire energy investments are about 3 trillion US dollars. And out of this, 1 trillion goes for fossil fuels and 2 trillion goes for clean energy investments. Only 10 years ago, when we hit the Paris Agreement, 2015, it was 1 trillion for fossil fuels and 1 trillion for clean energy. So clean energy investments doubled in the last 10 years. There is a strong growth there. So this is why we are seeing this clean energy investments and the interest for clean energy going so strongly. I would say there are 3 reasons behind that. One of them is simply economics. When we look at, for example, electricity generation, the reason behind the renewables are having 85% of the share of the all new power plants is basically renewables are cheaper compared to fossil fuel alternatives. Solar is today, in most of the world, is the cheapest source of electricity generation. When we talk about the electric cars, today in China, who is leading the electric car push around the world, the electric car costs are almost competitive to internal combustion engine, traditional cars. So I can give you many other examples that the economics do favor today many clean energy options. This is number one. Number two is the energy security. Many governments, citizens around the world understood that the clean energy is not only good for the environment, for the climate, but since they are generated at home, your reliance to some countries will be less, so that you have more energy security. We have understood this in Europe much better than maybe other parts of the world. Russia's invasion of Ukraine gave a big boost in Europe to accelerate the renewables and also making a comeback to nuclear power. Many European countries, for example, Belgium, the neighbor country to France, wanted to phase out this nuclear industry, but now they changed their opinion. They want to keep the ones what they have, and they want to build new ones. Sweden is another one. Holland is another one. Poland is another one. So this is the second reason. The energy security is coupled with the clean energy ambitions. This is the second reason. Third reason why we are seeing the clean energy investment or clean energy transitions going fast is the industrial policy. Today, when you look at the clean energy manufacturing, solar panels, windmills, batteries, electrolyzers for hydrogen, there is one country which is dominating big time, which is China. Now, China's being a leader in clean energy manufacturing is, in my view, not necessarily driven by climate policies, but it's an industrial policy. China is well placed to be the global leader of tomorrow's industry. So therefore, many countries around the world, United States, Europe, India, Canada, and the others now want to give a big push to their clean energy manufacturing in order to have an important position, a good position vis-à-vis China for tomorrow's industrial sector. Because tomorrow's industry sector will be dominated by the clean energy products, by batteries, by electric cars, by windmills, by solar panels, electrolyzers, heat pumps, and others. So the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, or in Europe, we have a similar program called a Net Zero Industry Act. They are driven by industrial policies, but at the same time, of course, helps the addressing the climate change. So these three elements, namely economics, energy security, and industrial policy for tomorrow's industrial sector are key drivers for clean energy transition, in addition to many governments wish to address our climate problem. Now here, Madam Chair, I wanted to finish my preliminary remarks by saying a few words on Canada. Canada has proven to be a trusted partner of Europe, of Asia, of other countries in terms of being a reliable partner in terms of oil and gas exports. Now, we know that in a climate constrained world, oil and gas may not be used or should not be used as much as today. But we will still need oil and gas, and it is good that this oil and gas comes from a country which is a reliable partner with low emissions of when you produce them. But the issue is, I think Canada and all other oil-producing countries need to make their plans so that if we were to reach our climate goals, there will not be a demand for oil and gas as much as it is needed today. So I think it is important to take this into consideration. And maybe one final point, when we talk about tomorrow's industry, the solar panels, electric cars, the batteries, we need substantial amount of so-called critical minerals, which is the lithium, which is the copper, which is the cobalt, and others. And the critical minerals mining is concentrated on only a few number of countries. And more importantly, more than 80% of the processing of those critical minerals is concentrated again in China. So therefore, it is very important that the countries beyond China do push their critical minerals mining. And there is a lot of critical minerals in the US, in Canada, in Europe, in Australia, and elsewhere. But at the same time, build the processing of these critical minerals industries. I remember very well that when we organized a first critical minerals summit at the IEA a few months ago, the Minister Wilkinson was very keen to bring the countries of the IEA members together to find the cross-fertilization among the countries to build the necessary manufacturing capacity for critical minerals processing. All in all, Madam Chair, I would like to finish by saying that we are going through a period where the clean energy transition is moving fast, and the countries need to, energy producing and energy consuming countries need to position themselves well. And on one hand, especially the energy producing countries push the clean energy technologies. On the other hand, they have to make sure that the future of the oil and gas industry is in line with the net zero climate goals. And I believe Canada is doing a very good job and a source of inspiration of many other oil producing countries. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
You're muted,
You're on
Senator
mute.
Coyle.
Thank you very much, Dr. Biro. That was a wonderful setting the scene for us, the global setting of the scene and positioning Canada. We're a little bit behind our schedule, so we're going to move quickly now to Mr. Johnson from Hydro-Québec. Over to you, Mr. Johnson.
Merci beaucoup, Sénateur Cord. Sénateur, ça me fait plaisir de vous rencontrer aujourd'hui. Merci pour l'invitation. I know we don't have translation, so I'll use English during my presentation. It means you'll have to endure my terrible French accent, so apologies in advance. So I want to share, so first, I want to say that at Hydro-Québec, we share 100% of the concerns and the takeaways that Dr. Birol just mentioned. So what's more to say? He shared a very global perspective. I think that what will be relevant for you is to hear from a more local player at a scale of a province like Quebec. So I'll share with you very humbly what is our vision of the energy transition, what are the challenges that we see ahead, and what do we see in our crystal ball. And I'll start by sharing with you what is keeping us awake at night. And this is how Hydro-Québec will be there to meet the targets that we have been setting as a society to be carbon neutral by 2050. So historically, what utilities have been doing when they do forecasts is they ask themselves, what is it going to happen by 2050? And then they do an action plan accordingly to what they think it's in their crystal ball. And we at Hydro-Québec used to do that. But let me tell you something. If we do this approach, we will not get to carbon neutrality by 2050 because we are asking ourselves the wrong question. It is not what is going to happen, but rather what needs to happen by 2050 in order to achieve the targets that we set as a society. So starting with the outcome and then do the reverse engineering to identify what are the actions that we need to do today in order to make sure that we achieve in 2050 carbon neutrality. So we have a plan that is optimal right now with the data and information that we have today. It might change in 2, 5, 10 years because even if energies are long cycle, we feel that there is a lot of disruption in the way that we think about energy in our society. There are new technologies. So we anticipate that this plan will evolve over the year and it will change. So now, what does it look like, the energy transition, in our view, in terms of energy demand, the infrastructure to build, and what are the challenges ahead of us? So let's start with the demand. In Quebec, about half of the energy that we consume today is come from fossil fuel. So this is the challenge. How are we going to move from fossil fuel to clean energy? We know that most of it will come from green electricity, but not all of it. And this is an important thing to keep in mind. We talk a lot about electrification. It's probably going to solve 80% of the equation, but there are still usage that will need green molecules like biofuels, renewable natural gas, hydrogen that we mentioned. So we need to keep in mind that electrification will not solve all of our problems. But let's keep the focus on electrification. In Quebec, it means that the demand of new electricity, we will need to double the electricity produced in Quebec in order to be carbon neutral by 2050. In other words, what we've been building over the last 80 years at Hydro-Québec, we're going to need to build exactly the same, not necessarily the same type of assets, but in terms of generation, but over a period of about 25 years. So that is the scale of the challenge. We're going to, in order to meet this challenge, so we're going to use, we're going to rely on energy savings. So this is the first thing, and I think there's a general consensus. The best energy is the one that you don't use, and we need to invest more in order to make our homes, our industries more efficient in the way that they use energy. We have the opportunity also to upgrade our existing facilities. So we have some plants that were built over 100 years ago. With the same slot, we can upgrade the turbines into more efficient turbines and generate more power. But this is not going to be enough. If we double the demand, we will need new generation facilities. We are considering new hydro facilities because it's so useful in order to balance the system. We're going to rely a lot in Quebec on wind power because it makes sense. But to give you an overview of what will be required just in the next 10 years, not to go to 2050, just by 2035, it is the equivalent of 15 times the area of the island of Montreal in terms of area covered by wind turbines. So it's enormous. In order to connect the generation to the consumer, it is 5,000 kilometers of new transmission lines that will be required. So in terms of new asset, new infrastructure, the challenge is gigantesque. So this is what we need to do. Now, the beauty of thinking about the outcome and then do the reverse engineering is that you can identify what are the implications and what are the bottlenecks. First of all, in terms of investments, it means Hydro-Quebec will need to invest over $150 billion in the next 10 years. Just to give you a point in comparison, we've been investing on average $4 billion a year in capital expenditures. It means that tomorrow we will need to invest between 12 and $16 billion in average each year for the next 10 years. This is a significant shift. So the first challenge is raising the capital. Having Michael Sabia at head of Hydro-Quebec, I can sleep well. I know that we're going to find solutions. It's a challenge, but it's a challenge that we can solve. However, when we look at the 4 billion that we've been spending the last years, you have to keep in mind that our capital budget was 5 billion. And the 1 billion that we did not spend over the last few years was because there was not enough workers and not enough construction companies in Quebec in order to give the mandates and the work and the projects. So if we are to raise from 4 to 16, we need to develop all the upstream value chain of the construction companies, which brings me to my second, and this is the biggest challenge that we have, is the workforce. If we don't have the workers, we will not be able to spend all that money to build new assets in order to electrify. We estimate that we will need 35,000 employees just to work on our projects in Quebec over the last 10 years, coming 10 years. At peak, it's going to be 20% of the current construction workers workforce that we have in Quebec. So it's enormous. The third challenge, and this is another one that it's workable, it's regulation and permits. So if we triple the size of the number of projects, it means triple the size, the number of permits. And there is overlap between federal and provincial regulations. It's a spaghetti of permitting and regulation. It's very, very complicated, and it takes time. So we need to simplify regulation and permits. We need to have more flexibility, and the regulation has to move from economic regulation to a regulation that has the sole intent to enabling the energy transition. Final comments. We cannot talk about this action plan without having a comment on how do we intend to realize this action plan. And we need to change the way we do things. So the recipe that we've been using over the last 80 years cannot be the recipe for success for the next 25 years. And I want to speak more specifically about the way that we deal with the indigenous communities. We want to make sure that building all these assets on their land, we want to make sure that the wealth generated by the energy projects uh, can provide First Nations and Inuit the opportunity to draw autonomous sources of income for them. So then they can use and allocate this income to their priorities of their own choosing: economic development, preservation of culture or language, practice of traditional activities, and so on. So we really intend to move forward. Hydro-Quebec is doing its own thing, and then we're building the energy system to partnerships with local communities. So I'll stop there. I know we are in a time crunch. Thank you very much, and happy to discuss and answer any questions.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. That was quite sweeping in that short period of time, and I'm sure we'll have a question for you if we get time for them. All right, now I'm going to very quickly ask Ms. Harland if you could put your presentation up and let us hear what you have to say. And I think you're going to be touching on some of the themes we've already initiated here.
I will indeed. So here we go. Hopefully you can see my slides and hear me okay. Great. So I'm joining you today from the Canadian Climate Institute. We're a not-for-profit, non-partisan institute. We provide research and policy advice at all levels of government on addressing climate change. And so as Mathieu mentioned, we actually started on some work in 2022 known as the Big Switch. And we started at the end, where we're trying to get to, how do we achieve net zero? And we found that in this context, that means we have to change our electricity systems to get bigger. That means more than doubling our capacity of our electricity systems. It means making them cleaner, and that's largely possible, as Dr. Birol mentioned, because of the affordability. That renewables are now the cheapest source of new power in Canada also. And it also means making our systems smarter and more flexible. Our topic today is really to talk about energy security, and I really want us to think here about the context, because if you're in a remote or off-grid community in Canada, then cleaner generation itself can offer some opportunities, for example, from moving away from reliance on fossil fuel imports and improving energy security and sovereignty. So I don't want us to forget that context. But also, for the majority of Canadians, when we think of security of energy supply, we think of can we maintain affordability and reliability as we grow our systems, and it's this piece for which the smarter element of this graphic from our Big Switch report is so important. I also wanted us to ask some questions at a 10,000 foot level. So I think this reflects a little bit on why do we need to act now? What does security of supply mean as we transition? How do we keep things affordable as we do so? And who is there to help us in this process? So as we think about acting now, this is really not a story of tomorrow, because the infrastructure that we build takes so long to build, and the demand is already growing, particularly we see from industry. We've seen this in Quebec, we've seen this in other provinces. And clean power really offers that competitive advantage for Canada. So how can we shift at the same pace that the demand is already shifting? We also need to think about better planning as we do this. So we can't play catch up for what is coming, because that comes with a cost. It reduces our options, and it creates some uncertainty about the reliability of our supply, which actually creates some negative reinforcement. So we need to consider also some of our questions around not just reliability, but also resiliency, and we'll come back to that later. Okay. So I mentioned, and I just wanted to finally remind just that we have a question of actors here. Sorry, go back one slide. That energy regulators do exist. We're now largely talking about a regulated sector with regulated transmission and distribution across the country, but also in many places on generation too. And these regulators have a really important role to play when we're talking about reliability and holding utilities to account and keeping costs manageable. So we're not just talking about building bigger. For the longest time, energy efficiency has played a really important role in keeping the demand lower than it might otherwise be. But we're seeing right now a new paradigm shift. We see utilities that are updating their planning projections due to growing residential and industrial demand at faster rates than expected. And we see new industries coming online as well, things like cryptocurrency, AI, that are huge sucks of power. And we need to make some hard choices, to be quite frank. And there's work that's being done in BC, in Quebec, for example, looking at some of these power-hungry areas and making some decisions about whether we should continue to connect, as we have done, in order of request, or whether there should be some prioritization of our use of our clean power. We also need to think about new signals too. So for industry and large commercial customers, for the longest time, they've paid rates which reflect some of their peak demand use of the system. But now we're also seeing places like Ontario look at providing some of that signal to consumers as well on a voluntary basis. Because to be honest, it's the peak that drives the costs. So we need to think about that carefully. How can we send better signals? And this slide here is actually from our Big Switch, report itself. It brings in some of that aspects of innovation on demand side solutions, as innovating with electricity rates, like I mentioned, but also some other factors that might influence or help our grid of tomorrow. So whether it's demand side solutions, storage solutions, grid solutions, there are many ways in which our grid tomorrow will look different. This could include, for example, bidirectional charging of electric vehicles. So these batteries on wheels can help us, for example, in supporting peak demand. It can be about pairing wind and solar with adding a short-term storage, so that reduces their variability. And even with battery backup, they can still be cost competitive on a cost of energy basis. Most importantly, we've got to think about managing our peaks. So that's filling in the valleys and bringing the peaks down for both reliable but also for affordable service. And so as we do this, we also need to think about, are we overbuilding our system? We want to keep that minimal to constrain cost, but there's always some times where we come close to that limit. And sometimes there are some emergency brakes that can be applied, things like voluntary options for industry to offer to curtail or reduce their production in times of extreme demand, or handling some of these extreme peaks via trade as well. The way we handle peaks as well looks very different regionally. It's much more challenging in some provinces in Canada than others. So on the supply side, if you're thinking about hydro provinces, we have this natural battery where we can use some pumped storage options to help compensate for that variable generation. Not the same in some of the other provinces. And we also, on the demand side, if you're in a province where you already have electrified your heating, like Quebec, for example, there's some benefit there from switching from baseboards to heat pumps, so you don't quite have the same challenge of adding that peak demand to your load. So there's some different challenges here regionally as well, based on the existing infrastructure. On this slide, there's a picture which is red and blue, which is the peak demand of a typical US electricity grid. And one point I just wanted to raise is that in the US, they're predominantly there's predominantly summer peaking systems, unlike in Canada. So we also need to think about the next topic, which I'm going to introduce, which is trade. When you have a system which is summer peaking versus winter peaking, there's some options here in terms of trade and exchange. And what we see for example, in BC here is that you have some active trading relationships which are saving Canadian ratepayers money. So that could be buying cheap power from California. Right now, when it's spring, there's even been negative power prices when there's oversupply, and then selling back that power later on at other times in the year. So that can really add some benefit, both from a cost perspective, but also from a reliability and resilience perspective as well. For north-south, we can benefit from some of these different climate conditions. And then for east to west, we can also benefit from differences in peak hours between our different provinces. And both can help in different ways. Now, on this slide, I've pulled up a map. It's an illustrative map of a net zero scenario in 2050. And it shows a little bit about what the generation mixes might look like in 2050. So the yellow and orange represents wind and solar, and you can see that some provinces have large chunks of wind and solar and might need more flexibility. But fortunately, they often have, in fact, almost all have, a neighbor who has a hydro resource, a large chunk of blue. And so that really also illustrates one of the key benefits of enhanced integration east-west across the country. So lastly, but not least, I just wanted to mention in the context of our electricity systems, we often talk about reliability, and then we're thinking about the ability of our system to maintain service in more standard conditions, routine, local, and short-term disruptions. And for this, we have reliability standards that are managed by the regulator and by North American standards. And regulators can and have asked utilities to increase, for example, their vegetation management. As an example, because vegetation and trees falling on lines, for example, is a primary cause of outages across our electricity system. But we also need to think long-term about resilience. It's a much broader concept. It brings in the questions of how to withstand high impact and low frequency events. So if we want to minimize their impact and recover quickly, we really need to think about how we're investing in resilient infrastructure. And the current regulatory system isn't as well placed to do this right now. We see the impacts if you don't prepare. For example, we've seen in California some of the increase in costs to their system around the wildfires. So we really need to think more carefully about how we prepare for this. So just to conclude, we need to think today about how we're going to invest in reliable, resilient, clean electricity supply to maintain Canada's competitive advantage. We have a competitive advantage in clean electricity, and we want to maintain that. But the infrastructure we're building, it takes time, and the demand can change much more rapidly, and it risks driving here. So we really need to have evergreen plans that will enable us to respond and adapt as we go. The grid of tomorrow will look different, so we need to take opportunities in new ways to manage both demand and supply and really reduce those peaks. And regional differences mean those technology options that we're handling may look different, and trade can really help here. And finally, I don't want us to forget the role of the regulator to help, particularly on the reliability side of things, and we need to work out how our systems can better consider resilience. We know we need electricity now more than ever, but this energy security really requires us to make active choices today, to plan now, to think, as Mathieu mentioned, of where we're trying to get to, of what is needed, not what, and to invest in the grid for tomorrow today. So,
thank you so much, Kate. That was a lot.
It was a lot.
Each of you has a very dense presentation, and we could have had each of you for a full hour. Anyway, we now know that, and we'll hopefully have some of you back. I'd like to now turn quickly to Dr. Leach. Please go ahead.
Merci beaucoup et comme Mathieu a dit, je vais vous parler en anglais, mais c'est un plaisir de prendre vos questions en français. So I'm going to try to jump ahead a little bit to make sure that I get everything in, but I did want to think about what do we think of when we say energy security, and we generally think of both quantity risk and price risk. We're thinking about, are we able to get the energy that we want in terms of physical deliverability, but also there's that overriding question of price. And sometimes, particularly in an energy exporting economy like Canada, these do tend to get mixed up, that we don't necessarily, sometimes high prices are good, sometimes they're bad. And we tend to think when we talk about energy security, I guess in particular with electricity, now we're maybe into more of the physical supply risk questions that carry the day. So I had in my deck, I had 5 points I wanted to make about energy security, in particular with a focus on electricity and the transition. And so I'll try to bounce through these as sort of quickly as I can to get to your questions. And these will have an Alberta focus, and particularly a focus that's become much sharper given our recent supply challenges on the electricity side. So I want to talk about scarcity and surplus. I want to talk a lot about the way the speed of the transition itself creates challenges. And then I'll probably leave most of the rest of this for Q&A or for that invite back to have a whole hour. So I put up a graph here, and these are California over the last, over April, so including this year, current to a couple of days ago. And what I wanted to emphasize with these this is the total electricity supply into the market, total electricity demand in the market net of renewable supply. So what we normally think of, shift your electricity consumption away from the middle of the day, that mentality that we've had driven into us for as long as we've used electricity, we're now pushing into a world where the cheapest sources of electricity, as Dr. Birol said, have become solar, wind, non-dispatchable renewables. And so that paradigm of scarcity and surplus, when are we in a scarcity condition? We're going to be in a scarcity condition more often when the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining, as opposed to it being a demand-driven storyline. And you can see, for example, the past month in California, the average midday net load, so the amount of demand that's not served by renewables, has actually been negative. So that led to what Kate was talking about with a lot of negative prices in the middle of the day. So that paradigm of don't do your laundry at 2 p.m. might actually start to change for a lot of markets in North America. But in a northern latitude province or country, Canada, Alberta, there are some challenges. And this is a graph out of my book from last fall, Between Doom and Denial. But what it shows is how our solar energy generation is distributed in Alberta relative to the temperature outside. And so that bottom chunk, the coldest 10% of the hours of the year, are the periods where we get the least generation from solar. And so when you look at California and say, great, build me some big batteries, we move solar from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m, and we can make everything work. In a province like Alberta, the challenge isn't moving solar from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. It's moving solar from May to October and May to November and May to January. And that becomes a much more challenging storage proposition. Just so you see the comparison, wind is better, but it actually still underperforms dramatically in the coldest and warmest days of the year. So those points where we have, Kate talked about summer or winter peaking systems, when we really need it, it is not always there. So adapting, and this is a point I emphasize in my book, adapting our ways of thinking about the transition to the places we're at. So we can't build California's electricity system in Alberta. We can't build Texas's electricity system in Alberta. And I think Mathieu would probably agree that the same thing applies in Quebec. We can't build a system that relies on the demand and supply dynamics of a different market. The next thing I'll talk about, and then I'll leave it so that we have some time for senators for you to ask questions, is the speed of the transition. And Dr. Birol mentioned this already, and I think Mathieu might have covered it, and Kate did, that the speed of the transition has caught us all off guard. And we see this from the global forecast, but I made this up. I hadn't made it before this week. So you're seeing this in global premiere right now. But these are the Alberta Electricity System Operators forecasts of solar penetration in the Alberta market. And I'll remind you that we're living in a world right now where the government just had to put in a moratorium on solar because it was outpacing anybody's sense of where we were at or what we would have had in the grid. And I'll point out to you that between 2017 and 2019, the blue curve and the orange curve, the AESO actually got more pessimistic on solar. They were saying, well, maybe we'll get, 1,000 megawatts by 2036. Then they went to, no, we're probably going to get closer to 500 megawatts by 2030. By 2021, they were still saying there's going to be no solar development in Alberta beyond 2023. It's amazing. 2022, they do a net zero report. This was the foundation for a reliability study that they did in the spring of 2023, saying, well, maybe we'll get sort of 4,500 megawatts by 2036. We've got over 10,000 megawatts in the queue today. And the latest forecast that the AESO has, that brown curve at the top, that's their latest forecast for solar development in Alberta. It's going to be outdated before it even hits print as well, just because there's so much potential for the use of that cheap energy. But the challenge we have, and this will be my last slide, senators, and I'll skip to my end. But the challenge that we have, of course, is that these transitions are occurring so quickly that we're seeing coal plants exit, we're seeing gas plants get built, we're seeing storage get built, we're seeing wind and solar, et cetera. And that creates an uncertainty that we're really not familiar with in the market. And this was one of the effects that we saw in January. We happen to have a relatively good wind and solar day, the first day of a cold snap. But beyond that, we had some really low on the 13th to 14th. We had some really low wind and limited solar events. And we ended up, all of us, getting messages on our phone saying, please, there's an emergency, please conserve electricity, or else we're going to be in rolling blackouts. And of course, we did end up in rolling blackouts a week ago. And a lot of that isn't a problem with wind and solar per se. It isn't a problem with gas. It isn't a problem with coal. It's a problem with the speed of the transition and the amount of flux in the system that we're dealing with in Alberta right now. So I had some other stuff, but I do want to leave some time for everybody to have questions, or at least a couple of questions. And so I will leave it there. So thank you so much. I look forward to your questions, and thanks for the invitation.
Thank you so much, Andrew. That was quite a feat to move through that, and very, very important input for us. We will have time for a couple of questions. We know that Senator Marshall will have the first one. Senator Ringuette is going to handle the questions. I think we'll have at least time for 2 or 3 if they're succinct. And then I just need a minute to wrap up. So over to you, Senator Ringuette.
Okay, thank you very much. And thanks for the presentations. If you're trying to scare me, you've succeeded. But, I'm an accountant. I'm not an energy expert, but I'm, following what's happening in Europe and Great Britain. And they're in the middle of an energy crisis. And so, I'm wondering, our policies, some of our energy policies are the same as theirs. So I'm concerned that we're going to end up in a similar position that they are. And just from what all of you are saying in your presentation, it sounds like energy and energy supply, it's not a simple thing. Like, there's many moving parts, and it just keeps changing, and there's so many aspects to it. I know Matthew was talking about, you need the money, you need the workers, you need regulatory reform, etc. So I'm thinking about from a national perspective, like, is there a plan? I've never seen what I would call like a national plan that would address even net zero, or even what we're going to do to 2030. So who's in charge of the national plan? I mean, Matthew told us about what Hydro-Quebec is doing. Who's in charge of the national plan? And where is it? Like, who's integrating all this to make sure that at the end of the day, we don't end up like Alberta a little while ago with brownouts or even blackouts? So can anybody answer that question?
Well, thank you, Senator Marshall. And I guess the best person on our panel to answer the crunch of your question is Madame Harlan. So, Madame Harlan.
I can answer, but I think Andrew also volunteered to answer as well. I mean, lots of the time we see provincial. We have so much is in provincial jurisdiction, and we need provincial planning for some of these energy systems because they're both regulated provincially and they operate very differently, right? So we see some provinces who are really thinking about net zero and planning and have done some modelling about the pathways to get there, but they are not the norm. We have a long way to go, and we are at the Institute. We're pushing quite hard to encourage every province to have a pathway, basically a pathway assessment and a plan that brings this through. But I'm going to pass it to Andrew because I think he had something to say on this topic too.
So I think we do have the Canada Energy Regulator doing a lot of work in this space, and of course the Climate Institute. But I think sometimes the challenge is that electricity is inherently very, very local. It matters, how much supply and demand is in a particular node and a particular transmission system, or particularly instant in time. And doing that level of detail nationally is going to be really challenging. I can see Mathieu nodding because, we know the way the system is put together. And I think sometimes we lose those important details when we start thinking at the national level. And I see this living in Alberta, where we'll have some national modeling, say, well, okay, tell me how that's going to work in Alberta when there isn't central planning of generation, when there isn't somebody that's going to procure that. How are you modeling the decision of private entities to build power generation? Well, we're not. Okay, well, then you've missed the most important aspect of our competitive generation system. And so I think what I would like to see is certainly more integration and more thought, not just at the national level, but at the international level of how much we are trading, who's trading with who. And again, this is landing on Hydro-Quebec's lawn a little bit, but every time I go to a conference in the US, everybody's counting on Quebec Hydro and BC Hydro and sometimes Manitoba Hydro. But if you add up everybody that's counting on those megawatt hours, there's a lot more megawatt hours being treated as imports from wherever than there are going to be generated megawatt hours. And so I think we do have that need for integration, but we really have to be careful about taking care of the local stuff at the same time.
Yeah, just one quick follow-up.
Elizabeth,
I'm done.
Well, I think Mr. Johnson would need
okay, carry on. Thank you.
A short comment on that one too.
Okay, well, I'm from Newfoundland, and Hydro-Quebec and Newfoundland are connected. So we need a national plan, not 10 or 12 or 13 provincial and territorial plans. That's it. Thank you.
I totally agree with what my colleague just mentioned. Even within Quebec, just to give you an example, we don't have an integrated planning system between the different types of energy. We need to see this as an energy system, not as an electric system. So we do integrated planning within the electricity stream, but we don't do it horizontally with the natural gas distributors and the petroleum companies. And this is where we need to integrate at first at a provincial level, but then really working very closely with neighbors to see what are the different interactions. And then at a national level, I think it would totally make sense. But we need to clean the house locally, I think, just to make sure that we understand and we have the clear understanding of the challenges locally, because I agree with you, it is a challenge and it's very complex.
Now, Senator Gignac, a quick question because we have 1 minute left. So maybe if our colleagues cannot answer the question verbally, that they can send in a written answer for the benefit.
Thank you, Pierrette, and thank you for our speaker. I share my question on the chat, but quickly, that applies to Quebec, but could be applied to Manitoba, BC, and others. So what the role could be played by pension fund? Because when Hydro-Québec will shift from 4 billion a year to 12, 15 billion capital spending a year, it's a lot of things and a lot of pressure on the balance sheet. So do our Canadian Public Pension Fund could become co-owner or partner to provide funding for this significant new capital spending needed to the energy transition to a greener economy? Thanks.
I can take it. Yes, I can take it briefly.
Sorry. I'm very sorry. Dr. Birol has to step off immediately, and he wanted to just say one word before he leaves.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Just to answer the very first question, the first part of the very first question, would Canada face an energy crisis like Europe? I would say absolutely not. There may be some energy crisis, but not like Europe, because Europe's energy crisis are based on two historical energy mistakes Europe did. One of them was over-reliance of energy imports of one single country, which was Russia. About 3/4 of the oil imports and gas imports came from one single country. So this was the first mistake. Second mistake was, in my view, just some 20 years ago, about 1/3 of the European electricity came from nuclear power, and Europeans turned their back to nuclear power, and the share of nuclear power declined significantly in Europe. Therefore, Europe needed to import a lot of energy from Russia. So, as an energy country, Canada wouldn't face this problem from external shocks. But in my view, Canada's main challenge is how to make its own energy plans in line with its climate goals in a secure and affordable way. With this, I wanted to, if I may, Madam Chair, I wanted to leave, but if you need me anytime, I will be very happy to come back and try to answer your questions with great pleasure and honor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Birol. Really appreciate you being with us. You've really set us up for a very important conversation. And I would just at this point like to mention to my colleagues online and to our speaker, I want to ask permission. I know Dr. Birol has to leave. would our three other panelists be able to stay on just to answer this last question from Senator Gignac? Okay.
Okay, so what I was just about to say is I'm not sure exactly what is the solution, but are pension funds, could they be part of the solution? Absolutely, yes. So we need to, and we actually already started to sit down with them to explore some potential alternatives, do some financial engineering, and see what is the appetite on both sides to create innovative solutions to deploy that capital. So absolutely.
Thank you very
Oh.
Okay, go ahead. Hey.
Well, I was, if Madame Harlan and Mr. Leach has a word to say on the financing.
Just one word to say on the pension fund side. I think there is definitely work there to be done in thinking about stranded assets and stranded asset risk. We think about that a lot right now at Institute with regards to some of the build out of the gas network, continuing expansion of the natural gas network, and how that aligns with a net zero future. So some of that thinking about potential stranded asset risk for things that lay in the ground for 50, 60 plus years. We need to think about right sizing our system for what it will look like in 2050. I think pension funds have a role to play there in looking at that stranded assets risk in particular.
Mr. Leach.
So I'd say two things. I mean, first of all, our pension funds are indirectly involved already in Alberta, where you have private sector participants anyway. So they're already brought in. And I'd love to see us have more private sector participation in transmission, for example, open that market up. The pension funds, I'd be a little bit cautious in terms of thinking of that as a source of below market rates of return. We don't want to create a tension between electricity infrastructure and this perception that people are losing out on sort of their retirement benefits because they've paid for electricity infrastructure or energy infrastructure and accepted below market rates of return for that. I think the availability of capital is important, but we want to be careful that it's not just sort of a backdoor way to subsidize electricity ratepayers or gas ratepayers or whatever the case may be, to pick up on Kate's point there. So yes, but might be my my overall answer to that.
Over to you, Mary.
Thank you. All right. Well, we say with climate, we need ambition, and perhaps we were overly ambitious today, but I think we fit in a very rich session. And I want to sincerely thank each of our presenters for the work you do and for sharing that work with us here today. And thank you to Senatrice Ringuette, having to squeeze the moderation there. I want to remind everybody here that the recording will be available to you as well as the presentations. We're going to share that widely. I hope everybody received our Senators for Climate Solutions briefing note on the federal budget. And please stay tuned as we plan our future sessions. We're going to plan a follow-up session with Peers for the Planet in the UK. And we're planning sessions on fuels and energy sources of the future, nature-based solutions, Indigenous-led climate solutions, transportation solutions, and anything you, our members, are interested in us following up on. And with that, I'll close the session again to thanks to all who spoke, to all who attended, and all who helped put this together. We're really happy to have this first session with the All-Party Climate Caucus. And so hello and thank you to our MP colleagues for being with us. Enjoy the day. Thank you so much. Walaleo, merci.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Merci.
Thank you, Mary.